Our stories don't change. Whatever happened, happened. And there's no taking it back. But who we are because of those stories does change. And those stories change us. And so it's one of the reasons why, because you're speaking to some things that are speaking about familial patterns, generational patterns, and how do we create change? And how do we, one of the ways that we can do that is we actually don't keep repeating the same story over and over again. Because there's an operating system and we're just going on the racetrack. And we don't get to escape the role that we were in at the time when it happened. That we had no control over. I'm going to loosely use the word control, but who we become because of that story is what we can influence, what role we play, what script we speak, you know. So we're just diving right in. We're not even through introductions. Okay, who else just wants to say your name and where you're from? And if you came here looking for something very specific, I like to know that. And you can put it in the chat box or you can speak it out loud. Martha is from the Bay Area. Woo, woo, lived there for 13 years. And I want to use storytelling in my workshops. Yes, for parent engagement. Yes, and vision board. Yes, and personal growth. Having people see themselves in the story and be able to find solutions. Okay, I've got you on my radar, Martha.
I guess I can share. My name's Janice Wardrop, and I'm calling in from the Coast Salish territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people in Vancouver, BC. Yeah, I've done a lot of writing, and I have a lot of boxes of writing. I have a lot of stories to tell, and I just find it overwhelming of what to do with it all. So would love any support guidance there, and how to better share those stories in different capacities.
Great.
Yeah. So really happy to be here. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, welcome. So what I'm going to say, Janice, is that the beginning of this time together, I'm actually going to tell you a story. I'm going to give a little history of like an introduction to what is story as a sacred art. And at the end of our time together, I'm going to talk about different ways that we can work together and what is the School for Sacred Storytelling and things like that. And we have this thing that's literally designed finish your story. So I've got you. I understand that one too. Okay. Anyone else want to just briefly share your name, where you're beaming in from, if there's something specific that you're looking for?
Okay, my name is Tressa. I'm here from Arizona, and I happen to see your post on Facebook. But I do coaching and talk to women about changing the narrative of their stories. I do sacred circles with women, and I'm just interested in a couple other things and adding things to help help them and even myself. And lastly, about 2 years ago, I started writing and didn't have any idea that a year later, when I looked at it, it was just really writings about where I came from, or where I was going in terms of powerful poetry. And so I thought, wow, this is like really where I'm supposed to be.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Tressa, where I don't know if you want to throw in a link where you host Sacred Sister Circles. If you want to put that in the chat box, you can, and if not, no worries. But I always love making the most of
Thank
these
you.
times that people are in the same regions.
Okay, it's online. It's actually online.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Put
you.
it in the chat box, if you would.
Yes.
Anyone else?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Good. I'm from Utah. My name is Donna Lee Wolf, and I love everything that I see you do, and it just calls to me. but I don't know how to navigate. I don't know where to dive in. I don't know where to begin. And I don't even know if I have the ability. What I do have is an open heart. And we dealt a lot with rampant mental illness in our family. We just lost a daughter in August. And in an effort to heal and make meaning of this journey, to bring a sacred aspect and just to make meaning and to facilitate whatever healing I can because of this journey. That's what I'm looking for.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah. Myrna, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. There's something a little, it's what we do in the culture here too, is we put our hands together and we give a little energy back. When someone does a deep sharing class, this is usually what we do, just to acknowledge that they've been received. And so your story is received. And the other thing that I really hear from you today is this real commitment to heal and to make meaning out of it, and understanding that stories can do that. Stories can do that. And what I'll speak to is part of my story that I'm not going to share today, but that I'll share is that one of the ways that I really came to understanding story as a healing vehicle, as a vehicle for healing, is that my best friend in high school committed suicide. And I went straight to writing because that was the place that I knew how to make sense of the world, was through reading. And so I went for writing and wrote a play, and that play ended up getting produced at a playwriting festival. And it was my first lesson in the responsibility of what you put out into the world comes back. Because at the time I was very young and I was processing my own grief, and I didn't understand the responsibility of when you put that out into the world, and then other people are going to come back to you with their grief, you know. And it is a responsibility when we start sharing our stories on the stage. When we're willing to have our stories amplified, there becomes this role of responsibility that comes with that. You know what they say: great power comes responsibility. So I'm gonna move into the part of our class now, and if there's anyone else that wants to share anything, please put so in the chat box. And I'm going to do something I've never done before in terms of how I'm telling my story. And I used to just teach a class, and it's shifting a little bit. And so I'm going to do a little bit more modeling today. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, just to feel your body in this space. You might want to take a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly. We live in a culture that isn't always the most accepting of this part of the woman's body, the belly. So just take a moment to, as you become aware into this, and to the vehicle of your body, just to become aware of those sensations that are there. And allowing yourself to breathe in deeply into the very bottom of your belly, and then exhaling out. And with this next inhale, I'm going to invite you to inhale the gift of this time together. The gift that you gave to yourself to really focus on something you care about. This form of expression, this form of story, this form of writing, this form of healing, this form of facilitating. That you came here because you wanted to learn something. You're probably wanting to expand your own experience, your own expression. You came here with an intention. So I'm going to invite you to breathe in that intention as if it could just be, it could come right into your system. You can leave with that having been met. Then as you exhale, exhaling out any resistance, any doubt that that's even possible, any criticism that's coming up, anything that's in the way of you receiving everything that you came here to receive today. And I'm going to begin with a storyteller's prayer, which is, may all the words that need to be heard be spoken. May all the words that need to be heard be spoken. And may all the words that need to be spoken be heard. Ahio, ahio, ahio. Ai-yo, 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 ai-yo. Ai, ai, ai-yo, ai-yo, ai-yo. Ai-yo. Ai-yo, ai-yo. I'm going to begin this story at the very beginning. At the very, very beginning of when the soul of my being came into this world. And as I begin to tell you this story, I'm going to be revealing what I've come to understand as a couple of threads of the art and craft of storytelling as a sacred art form. And I'm going to invite you to listen to these threads. And as you listen to the story, I'm going to invite you to listen for the story that's living inside of you. The story that's coming alive, that's being tapped at, that's being woken, that's being amplified through another's voice. Because that's what we do as listeners. Most of the time, especially in this modern day culture, we're rarely listening to someone else's story. We're most of the time listening to our own story through their own lens. So today we're going to do that super consciously. So I'm going to be inviting you to listen for your own story today. And as we do this, I'm going to be introducing you to parts of what is it to look at story as a sacred craft, as a sacred art form, and what does that mean? And so when we look at story, I look at story as having a spirit. And I use that when I employ that language of sacred. We're saying that there's something alive that's worthy of being recognized and being respected and having reverence for and honoring. And we're saying that that kind of energy can live inside of a story, and that kind of reverence can live inside of each of us as we share our own sacred stories. We can awaken and create a space for other people's stories to become sacred if they're not living in such a way. And as we share our own story as sacred storytellers, we're able to mark moments of initiation. An initiation in a culture that has grossly removed those elements of becoming and growing up to become human. So we're stuck with these words called adulting. Is anyone else driven crazy by that word adulting? Why do we need that word? You know, and I would say we're employing it because we're missing the normal thresholds of existence that create the opportunity for us to naturally grow into those. So now we have to claim these words that tell us what to do. Anyway, so my story begins in Africa. Oddly enough, my parents were driving across the Sahara Desert, and they were on a global trip around the world. And my spirit called them out of that journey and called them out of living in New York City, where they had been living, and called them to engage in what was at that time called the Back to the Land movement. And as true New Yorkers, they moved onto a gentleman's farm in Vermont. And I got to grow up on 40 acres of wild land at a time when there was so much trust and faith in the world that you didn't lock your doors. Maybe some of you guys remember this. We didn't lock our doors. We were allowed to run free. I would go out and come back after the sun had set. And I got to know the land, and I really fell in love with the land. And I was initiated by life at a very, very, very young age. My mother left my father when I was 3 years old. And she left and went to go get a degree in painting and to move to New York to be the painter that she most wanted to be. And I stayed on the farm with my dad. And the very first lesson that I received, which was one of abandonment. I understood abandonment. And I would say that core wounding would later bring me to the place of the gift of understanding and reclaiming the world of the wounded healer. I hate that word, wounded healer. What a strange branding. We're just going to brand you as wounded forever. Same thing with survivor. Why would you brand someone as a survivor rather than just as a healthy human being? You know, as Christine looks for those words to claim, to undo these old stories, right? Like how aware can we be? And that first experience of abandonment would be one of the core things that I would spend my life trying to understand more about and how to heal that, and took me into the greater story of belonging. And I think this greater story of belonging is one that so many of us are in right now. And this greater story of abandonment is in so many, whether it comes from the family or whether it comes from a culture, whether it comes from a country. And for me, my mother left me with this incredible gift. Because when she stepped onto a path in the middle of the feminist movement and said that she was no longer going to live in a relational system that doesn't respect women, when she wasn't going to be in a partnership that didn't see her as equal, and that when she decided to go forth and really pursue the passion and the truth of who she was and where her genius lived, even though it was extremely painful for me, she carved a path that I would get to follow for the rest of my life. It was one of the greatest gifts that I think a mother can give a daughter. I'm a little bit surprised. I never tell my story like this. So, it's like, again, like stories are brought out by the people who are listening. So thank you for your deep listening and your deep presence. What I said before is that our stories will never change. We can't ever change our stories, but who we become because of our stories, that's what changes. And I want to play with this word of change because it's been hijacked by the climate change movement. What a strange thing to cast change as the bad guy. That's what we've done in the environmental movement. We've cast change as the bad guy. It's very suspect. And I really invite you to look at this because it's so strange, because change is the most natural element of this planet. It's what she does. She changes every single year, every single season, every piece of life. She teaches us every day about life and death. It's summer for many of us, and we're gardening and we're watching our flowers bloom, and then we're watching them die. As this natural cycle of life that we get to be in. And so how we may change the bad guy. So this is one of the things I'm going to invite you into, is where in your life have you not been able to change, or not been told that you are allowed to change, or not been given the gift that change is part of life, even when it's hard. I spent a lot of time in my life, in my younger years, falling in love with stories and writing. So part of my childhood involved moving around a lot. I had a mother that lived in one state, a father that lived in another state, and I moved almost year between them, almost every year. Almost every year until I was in high school, I went to a different school. Has anyone else here had the pleasure of going to being the new kid in schools? No. Gosh, you guys are lucky dogs. It is not fun. It's just obnoxious that I even said the pleasure. It's, being a kid going to a new school, it does some great things. It builds resilience. It teaches you extraordinary skills for learning another culture, another community. It teaches you all kinds of things. But it's not a pleasant experience as a child. And for me, my escape, because it was every year for me, was books. I got really good at reading books. I was reading like Albert Camus like when I was in the 7th grade, which nobody should let any child do that. It's just so wrong. But I was learning about the world, and I was learning about the world in way more things than the people around me could teach me. I always called John Steinbeck my second father, because I learned so much about the world through his eyes. And so as I was doing that, I was also learning that books could be a form of escape. They could be a form of wonder. They could be a form of learning, and they could become a place of great comfort. And as I began to find that, I began to find that also writing was that very same thing. And I already shared a little bit about how I discovered that by writing my first play. And I was very lucky And I want to wonder with you about when you've been lucky. And you might even want to place this in the chat box, because I had a parent, my mother really saw that I had this thing for writing and for theater, and she put me in theater school. And I think of this as one of the luckiest moments about having someone outside of me at a very young age recognize my gifts. And so I want to invite you to wonder about, did you have someone that was recognizing your gifts when you were a young person? That was allowing you to be just who you were rather than expecting you to be something that fit into their model. And on the flip side of that, because we're not that child anymore, now I wonder, are you playing that role for young people in your life where you're looking out for them and you're really trying to help them become who they are and naming their gifts as you see them? So I think about this. I think of this as probably one of the most magical times in my life, that someone actually saw my gifts and talents and helped cultivate them. So I went to theater school. I was studying professionally in high school. I got recognized by a local theater company because I was doing auditions. I got invited in to be the very youngest member of this of a professional theater company. I had to study with absolute masters of the craft, and I was learning all these incredible skills, all these techniques. And I was very precocious. I was very talented. And I wanted to go to New York City to study acting. I wanted to go to college, study acting. My parents sat me down and they said, don't waste your time and our money if what you want to study in college is acting. Go find a great acting school and we'll support you with that. Later, I would find out that my parents were also having a very financially hard time. And so sending me to college was going to be challenging anyway. So it's like, again, listening back to how do we help people become who they are? You know, they didn't tell me they didn't have the money to send me to college. They said, look, they didn't even tell me to go find something less expensive. They just saw they saw the window through the act of God, and they said, go find an acting school, and if you can do that, we'll help you out. And so I did. I went to New York City. I studied at the neighborhood playhouse. I was in Sandy Meisner's last class. If you're in the world of acting, it's kind of a big deal. And it was an incredible thing. And once again, I was the youngest person there. And when I was brought in and when they accepted me, they sat me down. The director of the school sat me down. He's like, look, I need you to know that we don't ever take people your age. Most people come into this program as graduate students. And there's an 80% cut, and don't expect to make it through the second year. So they cut 80% of students after the first year. I was not invited back the second year to that school. And it was devastating. It was the first experience of rejection, like of that kind of major rejection. I didn't have any way of processing it. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. Nobody even in my program believed me when I would call up and tell my peers that I didn't get invited back. They thought I was joking. You know, it was very, very painful. But some part of my soul, like my soul genius, knew how to do something. And I don't even know how to do it. And that's why it's like when we tell stories, we're telling wisdom stories. We're telling them from the perspectives. We're throwing breadcrumbs behind us. We're saying, look, here's how you can do it, you know. But I honestly, all I can tell you in this moment of life is that somehow I knew how to listen to what was coming through. And I honestly believe that came from the acting process, because in acting, so much of what they're doing is they're saying, you know, acting is reacting. You know, it's about listening to that creative life force that's coming through. It's about being alive to the impulse. And something in that training must have taught me how to listen to the genius of my soul. Because what I did in that moment of deep humiliation was I tattooed on my body 2 Chinese characters that said changes for the better. And at my 19-year-old self, I took the reins of my life and I said, someone else is not going to determine if I'm talented, if I'm good enough, if I'm castable, if I'm whatever. I claim that this change and that all change that happens to me is going to be for the better. And so that was one of these key moments in life. And I didn't know at that moment what I was doing was actually like stepping onto the path of my destiny. What I knew at that moment was that I didn't want to end up spending my life speaking other people's words or having to play roles that weren't very good about women. And I also knew that there was this greater thing that was emerging in me, which was that when I was in the theater and when I was in that space, there was something that would happen in the room. There was this energy that would happen, and it was pure magic. And you could feel it. It was palpable. Something was created. And the moment you opened the door, it was gone. And I was really fascinated about the environment and social justice and I wouldn't have called it then, but now I'll call it healing. And I could feel that we were doing something in this space, but that we weren't catalyzing it. And I was really curious about how do we use this energy for social good? Like how do we tell a story and then have people like actually act on the story, you know, after they leave? Like what is the pathway that needs to happen? And I got fascinated by that at a very young age. I ended up going to college and following my passion for the wilderness. I went to Prescott College. If you know any young people that need an education, alternative education, wow, this was amazing. I studied wilderness leadership. I'd never been camping in my life. And all of a sudden, I discovered that I was in love with the wilderness. And I got a double major in outdoor experiential wilderness, where I learned a lot about group process. So a lot of leadership skills, a lot of how do you get through conflict, you know, these basic things, and then environmental education through performance. So I was also learning about the ecology, biology, how to teach about it, and how to do that through performance. So I found this crazy way to weave all of my passions together. And after that, I went on and I started working with youth at risk, because I really found this passion because of my own youth and just how challenging it was. I was really passionate about helping other kids that were going through a really hard time. I knew a thing or two about it. And doing that through the wilderness and finding this ability to find their strength and their sovereignty and being in community, it was doing all these kind of amazing things. And eventually I fell in love and I moved to Idaho. I wanted to go to Seattle. I had this big dream of going to Yale to study playwriting. That's what I really wanted to do. And I was with this man who I'd fallen madly in love with. And one morning I woke up and I told him I wanted to write this book. And he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Well, I want to write this play. I've got this idea for a play." And he's like, "You can't do that." I told him that I wanted to go to Yale to study playwriting. And he's like, "You can't do that. You're going to pigeonhole yourself into a career where you're not going to ever make any money." And I listened to him. Some of you might be wanting to make him into the bad guy right now. And some of you guys might know what it is to have someone in the most intimate places of your psyche and in your bed telling you that you can't do something. And the consequence of that. I listened. I listened to the words that came out of his mouth, but more than anything, I was listening to my own fear. And by listening to my own fear, I went and I got a master's in social work because he thought that would be a good degree. I would always be able to get a job. And this I really think of as one of the most key thresholds in life, because no one had taught me about fear. No one had taught me that fear is a sacred ally. That it's one of the ones that you meet. It's the being that you meet when you're on your journey. And that when you turn and face fear, it will call out your courage. It will call out your strength. It will call out your chutzpah. It will, you know, I can tell right now that Tressa has turned and faced her fear, you know, that I didn't know. So I turned and I beelined it away from my fear, away from being the artist I most desired and wanted to be. And I went straight towards getting a master's in social work because I thought that would be the safe degree and I would never have to live a life of poverty. Because, by the way, I knew a thing or two about that because I lived with my mom in New York City trying to make as an artist in the 70s. I didn't want to do that again. So I got this degree, and it was a mighty degree. I learned a lot about, I ended up focusing on the clinical element, you know, in terms of, basically like, it's a social work degree. It's a kind of amazing degree in terms of that you learn about social systems, you learn about networks, you learn about politics, you learn about community organizing, and you also learn about one-to-one counseling. And so it blew open my mind in terms of systems thinking, in terms of how the world works, and it gave me the hard skills for how to do one-on-one counseling. But there was a problem, which was that I was so out of my league in terms of my happiness quotient was like below the road. I was so not with my people. I was so not in the truth of what I was. I was like fascinated. I was learning, but I was not activated. And as I was going to this job interview, I placed my hand on my neck and I was thinking at this job interview that if I took this job and I followed this path, it was going to kill me. And as I did that, I felt this lump underneath my hand on my neck. And it was so large that I actually stopped the interview and went straight to the doctor. And what had happened was that I'd had an overnight growth and they discovered that there was a tumor. And my body agreed. This was not the path for me. I ended up discovering that I had thyroid cancer. And I spent the next 2 years making my way through that journey of healing from that experience. At the beginning of it, they told me that there was a very good chance I could lose my voice. And there's nothing quite like knowing that you could lose something that really makes you understand how valuable it is. So when I got on the other side of that, and I was standing on my own 2 feet again, and I had a voice, I had spent so much of that time walking this garden, and in every hero's journey, there's always someone outside of your family system that helps you out. There's always a fairy godmother. You don't always know who they are or what they are. And a lot of times we can get stuck in the story of there's nobody there for me because the people who got assigned the jobs of being in your family system don't know how to be there for you. And so I invite you to, in this moment, consider what were your fairy god beings, that were in your world that didn't necessarily look like they were in that role, but did create some kind of support from outside your family system. And in that particular moment, it was a garden. I walked this spiral of this garden every morning and I prayed. I prayed for my life. Actually, sorry, I gave my gratitudes first. I didn't know anything about gratitude this time. The land taught me about gratitude. I knew nothing about gratitude. But it was walking the spiral every day that gave me that gratitude, that gave me that practice. And on my way out, I would pray. And I didn't do much praying before this time either. I didn't know anything about prayer. And I would honestly say, the land taught me about prayer. And it taught me about listening. And it taught me about listening for a vision. And when I came out of that experience, I had a vision. And I went on to create my first nonprofit, which was called the Performance Initiative. And it was committed to utilizing the arts for social change. At that point, we were right in the situation where I think it was the Great Chad moment, and there was a huge commotion around politics, and the bigger commotion was that young people weren't voting. And I saw a crisis. I saw a crisis in our system, and I also saw a crisis in our storytelling. And so I created this piece that was committed to getting young people to speak out about their political views and giving them the skills and techniques to do so and to be recorded. And we made this giant live event that was part documentary with live screens and part live performance. And what was very unusual about it was that I got Republicans and Democrats to speak about their political views in the South. What I didn't know going into that is that for every right reason, Republicans are very suspicious of liberal media because liberal media does not have a good history of respecting people of different perspectives and views. And I went in there just saying, look, I want to hear everyone's stories. I want to see where we're alike. I want to see where we're different. But really, I was looking for where we were alike. And I really believed, and I was really interested in how do we capture all that energy? How do we capture all the energy that we're going to create and all this wonderment and all this love of our country and all these common things that we have? And then how do we actually put that into action? So we actually we brought in 30 different organizations of different political perspectives and different people doing different things. So we would have pro-life people next to pro-choice people with the reason with a thought process that if we were all more involved with our democracy, then we're going to have a healthier democracy. And so from that experience, I really fell in love with documentary filmmaking. And I ended up moving out to the Bay Area with this big prayer. I was like, put away the degree. I'm not going to go do one-on-one counseling because that was not an option while I was dealing with cancer. I am going to where can I actually have the greatest impact? How can we use story for social change? And how can we get people online with the environment and what's happening? And the thing that was also happening with me in the background was there were two things that were running in the background. One thing is that I deeply believed we can't save the planet if we can't save ourselves. And that saving this thing out there starts like at this replica of the body. And the other thing was that I had met a mentor, who I met him when I was serving coffee in high school. His name was David Baugh, and he was a Black civil rights lawyer for the ACLU, who was infamous because he represented the KKK on a freedom of speech case. And I was just enamored with him. He was a large presence. He was brilliant. He, demonstrated his love for social justice in a way that was extremely unexpected. And I really respected him. I really respected him. And when I told him that I was going off to school for theater, he looked at me and he was like, "Leah, it's not enough." And those words haunted me. They haunted me. Look, it's like 30 years later, they still haunt me. And so I invite you to consider, when did someone say just one line in passing that somehow took hook and resonated with something so deeply inside you that you could feel that there was something there, even if you didn't know what it meant at the time. So this idea that theater wasn't enough was still in me when I started that theater company. So I went out to the Bay Area and I had this dream. I was like, God, okay, I want to have this great environmental impact and using story and for social change. But I got a master's in social work. And by the way, no documentary film company is going to hire someone with social work. But I was very lucky. And I ended up getting to meet the fellow that started C Studios. And he created this, Mark Shelley, and he created a film called Strange Days on Planet Earth. I don't know if you guys know about that. It's one of the very first films that came out to talk about the environment. And he was a really good interviewer, and he understood that I had all of this strange community organizing experience, that I knew under systems, I knew how to bring people together, and they were beginning to do this work around dialogue and deliberation in films. And they figured if we could show you a film and we could teach you how to use the skills, then we could bring you to action. And so he actually gifted me my career at that point. And I started working with filmmakers in terms of teaching them how to create campaigns for social change. But there was something still very empty in my system, where there was something that was not, I was like close to the story, but I wasn't writing the story. It was driving me crazy. And so I invite you to think about those moments in your life when you were like close to what you wanted, but your heart wouldn't settle. Your bones wouldn't be still. You knew that there was like something that still wanted to be lived through. And this is different than the thumb at your back telling you that you should be named for something or recognized for something or famous or make more money. That's something else. Those are the external things, but that there's something inside you that's like really screaming to get out. I ended up going I had 10 lucky days where I was asked to take care of a friend's homestead up in Northern California, because I'd grown up on a farm and I knew a thing or two about that kind of stuff. I could do that. And so I did, and I sat down for these 10 days and I thought I was going to figure out my life. Just going to figure it out like a good Capricorn, because we like to do those kinds of things. And I thought I was going to make a plan and maybe a business plan and do all this stuff. And I sat down and I prayed. And when I prayed and when I listened at the edge of this cliff, I heard some of the most distinct guidance that I've ever heard in my life. And it said, "You know nothing." So I know it's not me talking. I said, "You know nothing. Take long walks, take long baths, and listen." And to me, that was like a little prescription for a torture chamber. I just wanted to do. I was always such a doer. This idea of stopping and listening did not sound fun or relaxing or easy, especially when I was still trying to figure out how to make rent It's like that was not what I wanted to do. But the guidance had been so clear that I decided to follow it. So I did for 9 days. I took long walks. I took baths. I walked in the forest. I listened. And then on the 9th day, I got really pissed off because nothing was happening. And I was like, if you're going to give me guidance, and I'm like really coming in with a desperate prayer to show me the way of how I'm supposed to be, like then bring it. And there's something about that fierceness that happened. And all of a sudden, I heard a whale singing through the forest. And I ran back to my computer thinking that I was going to write some pretty little poem. And I wrote the first 14 chapters of a book that's now called The Whale Dreamer. And this was the book that was in every aspect the answer to the prayer of how I most wanted to live in the world. It talked about the 6th mass extinction. It talked about the war in our oceans. It talked about all of this through a love story between a young girl and a whale. It was more than I could have asked for, and it all came through this deep, deep listening. And while I was there, I'd started doing this process of just grounding to the earth and connecting to spirit and opening the channel and listening. And that's how I began to write that book. But that book was not going to pay my rent. And so I went back to San Francisco. I hustled some more. And because of that strange passion around getting young people involved with politics, I ended up working on Al Gore's pet project to get people to speak out about political perspectives in the computer, on screen. And because I worked on that, I ended up then working on the Green Channel, and I produced the Green Channel and hosted the Green Channel. And when I was doing that for him, there I was in the center of the climate conversation. I was working with this recipe. What's the information that we need to get them to inspiration, to motivation, to activation? So I ask you now, what are the questions that are guiding you in your life? What are those key questions that you're holding in you? Because there's an answer inside of you that's ready to be spoken. What I learned by looking at the data was that I was actually asking the wrong question. Because the data showed me that people weren't responding to information. They didn't respond to the climate scientists, the policy wonks. They responded to the dancing penguins, and they responded to the story about Roz Savage, a woman who sailed across the sea to raise awareness about plastics. And something in studying that liberated me from the news and information world and brought me to the truth of where I live, which is around story. And that story is where change happens. I spent the next years writing that novel, and that novel took me to more and more remote places in Hawaii, in California, always by the ocean, in deep states of listening, living very humbly. And in the process of that, I learned about what a story is. And in the process of that, I also got to start to meet storytellers like Martin Shaw and Michael Mead and Carolyn Casey. And when I would listen to them and I would hear them talk story, I could feel that something was missing in my own expression of talking story. Because some friends of mine, they're like, don't read us your short stories, tell us your stories. Again, I had friends that called out the gifts. And as that happened, I started to realize that I don't drum, because a lot of men will drum in the story. But Spirit said, but you sing. And I started singing for the stories. And I ended up discovering that I practice an ancient form of mystic storytelling, which is about story divination, and it's about divining what's happening in this space. So now I actually do this. I do a lot of story circles and story ceremony circles. And it's that moment of how do we work with a story to come into the space and make use of this healing energy that emerges when we're all in this co-created energetic space, sharing one story, which is something that most of us don't ever get to do very often. We're all going to even look at the same story and see different things, but at least we can share the one story. So from there, I ended up coming into this question of, how to weave the paths of social justice, environmental justice, love of story, love of bringing people together. How do we do all of this? And what emerged was a school for sacred storytelling. I never would have thought that's what would have happened. But that's really what happened. One step in front of the other led to working with story as a tool for healing, working with story as a tool to bringing us together, working with story as a tool for transformation. One of my favorite things that anyone's ever said is, you're not my therapist, you're my stories therapist. you know. And so much of what I've learned about story absolutely comes from the masters of our time, and I credit each and every one of them every time I share some of their knowledge. And then a lot of what I know about sacred story has come from the land itself, and has come from sitting with stories for a very long time by myself, listening to what is it to become involved in a humble way to the spirit of a story that wants to be lived through you, and how we're all having stories lived through us all the time. And when we understand that, all of a sudden we get to live in our story in a little bit of a different way. I always say, if you're not telling the story, you might end up playing a role in someone else's story. It almost happened to me last night. My housemate wouldn't clean. She wouldn't clean the house. I thought I was going to lose my kittens. You know, why didn't she do this? She makes me into the mother, blah, 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 blah. You know, like I'm just going on the script. And I got to like catch it. I was like, oh, here I am playing the role of this like mother character that I don't want to play in with a housemate. But what if I had a conversation with her before the brunch? What if I had specifically talked to her about what role we're each playing? What if we had consciously done this? What if I had not unconsciously set up a situation for someone who I know isn't very aware, you know? So it's like each and every day we can, like, what I love about being in the realm of story is that it gives us, to me, the get out of jail free card. Because all of a sudden we can step outside the story, we can step outside the role, we can step outside the script, and rather than be shaming and blaming, and you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't think that, you can be like, oh my God, there's the critic again, or there's that being again. One of my favorite roles, and I would ever say, if you ever want to play this game, is to be able to name your different archetypes. You know, you probably have 3 or 4, and I'm not talking about the great mother or the muse. I'm talking about Wicked Whiny Wendy or Cindy Complainer. You know, we have the great ones, and we want to not name and honor those, but also let's have fun with those ones that get activated by people that aren't our, that kick up our shadow selves. You know, when we can have fun with it, then we can start to learn from it. You know, and then we're starting down the road of change. So we're nearly at time. So what I want to do is I just want to leave you with a little story blessing. And this is a method that I learned from Carolyn Casey, who learned it from John O'Donohue, who's an Irish mystic. And the way that a story blessing goes is it kind of goes like if then. So you do a little bit of a listening and you think about the metaphor of your story. If you find yourself on a boat that's headed out to the great sea, and you see something on the horizon, you know you must go there. But somewhere in the dark of night, your ship sinks, and you find yourself sinking to the bottom of the ocean with nothing to hold on to. Then, may the light of the moon shine so bright through the darkness that you easily make your way to the surface, and that there is a community of boats there waiting and ready to bring you aboard and help you on your way. So you can end any story with a story blessing, and no one has paid attention to that. You don't have your perfect little ending, you know. And so I wanted to honor our time and endings today. So it's a great technique that you did. So today what I did was I took you on a wild journey, you know, through my own story. But what I tried to do is I tried to point out the parts where are the parts where there's a teaching story? You know, where are the parts when we're teaching our wisdom story? Where are the parts where we're teaching and sharing parts of our own very private and intimate medicine stories? How can you be so courageous as to share the truth of your own pain? Sometimes we just want to make ourselves all shiny and perfect and great, you know. And we're so honest. We're touching those universal truths. You know, John Steinbeck says, if the story isn't about the reader, it will not last. So when you come on as a sacred story, you're coming on to tell our story. I'm sure I told parts of all of your stories today. I could see it in your lines. I could see it as you nodded. You know, I could see it in your smiles. I could see it in your smirks, you know. And that's what we do as sacred storytellers. We tell our story in a very generous way where we're also throwing those breadcrumbs behind, because you've studied your story and you figured out the parts that made it work and you've figured out the parts that they don't. And you're like, look, we can go on this coevolution journey. There's so much obsession with evolution. And I really believe that when the conscious evolution happens when we get to stand on the shoulders of that one's behind us on their story. We don't have to make the same mistakes. Think about that in the Me Too movement. How many times did we listen to the exact same story over and over again? And if more women had been able to speak what had happened without the shame or the blame, then how many more women wouldn't have had to experience that because they didn't know better? But that's changing now. Right? We're not going to experience that again. Next generation, lids off. So, and that happened. And I mean, how long did it take us to get to that moment, right? But then it was like, how long was that movement? Like 3 months or something. I don't know exactly. But let's not pretend how long it took to get there. So that's our story for today. And if you find yourself compelled to really look at how do you tell your story, how do you tell specifically a teaching story, a medicine story, a wisdom story, how do you bring your stories to the surface, and how do you do it in a community that what I love about the community that gathers around sacred stories, that we haven't come to use a story to manipulate or to sell something. Okay, we're coming to working with story as a tool for healing, as a tool for connecting to the earth, as a tool to connecting for each other. What I understand about the mystery of storytelling is that if you look at story as a mystery school, it will teach you everything you need to learn about how to be a good human. And I didn't know that when I set out as a storyteller, but it really does. It teaches you all the basic skills of how to be a good human. It teaches you about listening. It teaches you about the responsibility of standing on the path of eldership. It teaches you about how to be responsible with the power that you have. And I would think that more than anything, it teaches you about sovereignty. I think sovereignty often gets confused with freedom, but it's different. And it teaches you how to bring people together. And that if there's anything that I think about what's going on in our world right now, and if there's any main skill that like, wow, can be activated more and more and more in us, is like, how can we come together and share and listen and share a story when we're living in so many different stories at once? How can we be human together when this technology is pulling us apart? And that to me is what storytelling does. So what I'll share is that there's a couple things that are coming up right now. One of them is that there is a school for sacred storytelling. We've got this big, beautiful year-long program that happens. And it walks you through, the program was designed to walk you through the different chakras of your body, to look at where the story's living in each side of your body, where do they need to be cleared out. So you get to really go on a story journey of where all the stories that you have and all these different experiences of your life, and then what needs to be cleared out, and then you come out to tell the story. Then you have a story stills class. What I discovered in teaching, I've been teaching online for 4 years, is that a lot of people can't do a long program. You just kind of get burnout, Zoom burnout, and so I broke them into short modules so that people would still have a really great, successful, complete experience, and take a break and come back when they wanted to. So we have 2 classes left in this year's program. One of them is called Vision Stories. I'm particularly in love with this class because nobody in any story school teaches anything like this. And it's the stories that I feel like are so needed at this time, because so much of our future has been hijacked by so many images and ideas about what our future is supposed to look like. We are the storytellers that are creating the future with every breath and every step that we take. So it's like, we're the visionaries. So creating the skills to create a vision story. And what I'm excited about this class is that you learn a technique on how to create vision story circles so that you can have fun with people and co-create vision stories together. And it's just super fun. So that class actually started last week. Today is the very last day you can register for it. And it's 3 more classes. And you'll have just enough time to, if you register like right now, you'd have enough time to get in there, watch the last video, and do some of what we talked about doing. You could get enough done to be with us on time for tomorrow. The other thing that is coming up is a class called Cantadora. And Cantadora is all about learning how to carry an old story. This is the only class I teach about this. It comes once a year. And because a lot of what I do is I help people cultivate how to tell their stories. In this class, you'll get to, we're doing what the Australians say, the stories from the past must be carried into the present in order for the future to exist. These old stories are all carrying lots of wisdom, you know, and so we want to make sure that they stay alive and they stay among us and we know how to carry them. And it's a thing. It's not just about repeating the words. There's much more to it. So we're going to go on a 4-week journey, and you're going to get to choose your own story that you will learn, and you'll get to perform it at the end. And what I would say about the communities that come together around this is that there's a commitment to seeing each other's greatness. So someone said, I don't even know if I'm ready or if I have the skills to do this. You don't need, the only skill that you need is the desire to be there and the impetus to show up. And then the courage to keep showing up when you meet your edges, you know. And so we build a community that's designed to really support us to meet those edges and to go past them and to come into a sense of play, you know. And that's what we're really doing. Play is an advanced skill. It's where we learn. And so you get to play at learning to tell your own vision story or learning how to carry an old story. Then the other thing I will have a 1-day workshop coming up very soon, it's called Myth, Magic, and Medicine, Storytelling for a New Paradigm. And that teaches a very specific technique and skill for how to work with story as a tool for healing, specifically around trauma. So if you've had like a major thing that's happened in your life or a major something that's unresolved, we get to come in together and really play with it, and you'll come out with another version of your story. And we work with that through mythic, through working through a really playful way of taking your story and telling it in the mythic dimension and then bringing it back. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please do tell me, because I like to know in terms of if there's people interested in that 1-day workshop. The other thing that's happening, and this is radical and new, and you're actually the very first people that are officially hearing about it, is that what I've noticed is that we'll create these really strong bonds, these strong communities, and people then have the skills to tell, and they want to keep telling, but we don't have a place to do it. And Facebook's getting stranger and stranger. And so I'm looking at creating what's called a mighty network, where it will be a private community where people from within the community can actually start their own groups. So you can, if you want to come and have a writing prompt each week, I'll have writing prompts for you. If you want to work specifically, like we're going to have a monthly story ceremony where we're going to get to work with a story and work with what's in our collective, and you'll get to experience and be part of that. And what's really exciting is we're also going to have a book reading club, and every month we're going to take a story out of this book, which is called Other Council Fires Were Here Before Ours. And this is a classic Native American creation story. What it is it has one story for each month of the year. And so we're going to be we're going to get to study some old creation stories together as a collective. So it's a place where you can share your own stories, create your own stories, and be part of a greater community that has stepped into a very specific quality of being together in these times that encourages honor, dignity, respect, and clear communication. So it should be fun. So if that's something that you're interested in, also, I like knowing that. So let me give you some links. I'm going to put some links right in here just because we just had a massive transition in my world. I had a lovely Katie, was our alchemist of all good things for many years, and she ran all the behind the scenes world, and she just moved on to do more of her own performance work. We now have the amazing priestess of, I think she's called the Priestess of Getting Business Done, Mandy, but she's still learning how to do things. So I'm going to give you links right now because the email will be coming. I just don't know how soon. So if Vision Stories is your thing, I'm giving you this link in the chat box right now. And the Cantadora class, that will be coming soon. And if you're interested in a closed online community for sacred storytelling, where you get to have these monthly things happen, drop me a line because I do love to know what's there. Okay, that was a lot of talking. I don't ever talk this much during classes. So are there any other questions that you have? Okay. So what I'll also just say is if you can always go to the bookstore and you'll find all kinds of goodies such as ebooks and writing prompts and things like that.
Leah,
Yes.
this is Myrna.
Hello.
You said, hi, I'm sorry I was late. um, you said that the vision stories it's a 4-week thing, but it's part of a bigger thing. Is it, and it's the second to last one? And then the last one is the one that's telling the stories from the past?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a break then in the 4 weeks? There's a 4 weeks and then a break and then 4 weeks?
Yeah. So we'll be together for 3 more weeks. Then we'll take 2 weeks off, and then we'll do that other class.
And this vision stories is it Tuesdays at noon? Tuesdays
It's
at 11?
Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
So, okay.
Okay, so I have a question. Do you start so is it like um different 4 weeks series of something going on, but like it lasts a year, but it's something different every so many months or
Yes.
every so many weeks? Okay.
So it's kind of unique in that it is one curriculum that's designed to go together, but for our modern world. And so each class is a standalone class. So what you'll see is in each class, there's a core group of people that have been traveling together. So there's a lot of connection and intimacy. The thing that I love about these classes is that, one of the, we all have those things that like just give us a lot of pleasure. And one of mine is like matchmaking. And
Mhm.
so in each class, you get assigned a small group that you can meet with outside of class. And I actually just got to meet a student who I'd met, she was a participant who I'd met online last year. And I ran into her on the street in LA. And we were like, oh, yeah, I recognize you. And she was like, I'm still with that small group. We still meet every week. And I just love that, it's like you get to meet these people who are aligned in ideas and values and how you want to express. And then you're just with each other. It goes beyond the class. So does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
it does.
Okay.
I'm just curious about your monthly storytelling. So what's the format and how does it work?
So I do something called Soul Stories, which is, I'm just going to pull up this link now, which is a form of mystic storytelling. And it's a beautiful, people can come and get a private session when they're going through a threshold. Couples will sometimes do it when you're just like really wanting to do a deep dive and look at what's living in your consciousness, what story are you living in, and how do you want to address it. And then I also do it as a monthly story council called Hour of the Wolf. And that's when we come together as a community and all experience a story together, and we all share in about what we learned and what we're discovering about ourselves and our collective through the story. And so that's a monthly subscription, and that's right there. And then I also do one-on-one coaching. So if people are really at a point where you know that it's your time to have your voice heard, and there's a threshold that you're really working on crossing, this is one of my favorite times to work with people, And so I call it sacred storytelling priestessing, because it's not just coaching. It's really working with that coming out is an initiation, and how we use our voice and when we use our voice and why we use our voice we're being asked more and more and more to be conscious creators. Because at the very beginning, the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. It's what all the ancient religions agree. And so what we really work on this space is how can you be a conscious creator to what you're birthing into our times that will become your legacy through every word that you speak. So that's when people have big projects they want to bring through, or they're really wanting to work through a block. That's a fun time to come for that one-on-one time. All right. Anything else? Okay. Well then, I'm going to leave you with a quote because it's just like the best way to end. And why do we leave with quotes? Because it's like we honor those who have come before us, who are further down the path of committing themselves to language. And it's a way of it's sort of like bowing to the Tai Chi teacher. You know, you're not actually bowing to your Tai Chi teacher. You're bowing to those who have gone before them. And so I'm going to bring you a quote by Stephen Jenkinson. Act as if you are people of consequence, so that I can treat you as such, and you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence in this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to proceed, that there is consequence to us being here. So, with that, I leave you adieu. Were you at the question in New Orleans? I don't know. I did used to write for Fast Company, but I don't think I was. I don't know what collision is, so I don't think so. No, I wasn't I wasn't in New Orleans.
Okay.
But
I thought we might have met there.
oh, no. All right. I will share that quote in our chat. And then I also invite you all, if you want to, just take yourselves off mute and say farewell, have a good day. And, you know, one of the things that we do at the end of each class, we always just anchor in something that we want to take away. So if you learned something about yourself or about your practice and how you want to speak story today, you might just want to take a little note for yourself, just to anchor it in. Okay. I'm going to bid you adieu.
Yeah, this was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yes, this was great.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Thank
have a
you.
good day.
It's validating. Thank you.
Good, good, good.